whole lot of different streams. And the first answer is, well, then just have one TCP stream for each connection that's going through. And that turns out to break all of the cable modems out there because they can't handle that many connections in their state table. So the easy fix, I say easy, but it turns out to be complex in practice, is that we need to switch from TCP to some sort of datagram, some sort of UDP-based protocol. And the first step was, let's switch to UDP on the network, and let's put user-space TCP proxies on the first edge on Alice's side, and then another one on the far side. And they need to be user space because otherwise you're going to be leaking details about what OS you are and stuff like that by the characteristics of the IP packets that you're seeing. So that's great, except there are no usable, secure, maintainable, portable, free software and a few other properties TCP stacks out there. And we've got a professor named Ian Goldberg who's working on this problem at Waterloo, and he has a series of master's students who are looking into it. The latest idea is that we should do user space SCTP, and I'd be happy to chat more about that one later. It's a big, complex mess. Every time I talk to different systems people, they say, oh, you should do it exactly like this, and those other ideas are all horrible, except they're all pointing to different ideas whenever they say that. So I really have no idea which way we should go next. And I've been talking to other folks who suggest that you don't want drop-based congestion control. You don't want a system where if it's talking too fast, you drop a packet. Instead, you want to be doing delay-based congestion control, where you see how long it takes for the packet to get from one end to the other and back. And then you can do the math and figure out how much you should slow down or speed up. Okay, so another problem with the congestion control, flow control stuff. Right now we've got built-in congestion control end-to-end in the Tor network. And the way it works is, as soon as I build my circuit, as soon as I make my connection to the other end, and I ask for CNN or some website, there's a circuit window that specifies how many cells that exit node is allowed to send back to me. And it starts out at 1,000. So that's half a megabyte of stuff that it's allowed to send. And once it's sent that half megabyte, it's not allowed to send any more until I send some acknowledgement cells to it saying, okay, I got those, now you can send me more. And that's a great idea in theory, except first of all, it's a fixed size window. It's not dynamic like TCP. And second of all, it's huge. 1,000 cells is way more than most windows are going to be. And back at the beginning, I was thinking to myself, okay, so my goal is to maximize the throughput that we can get through Tor, and obviously that means that we'll optimize all of the other network properties like latency and all sorts of other stuff. And that turned out to be a reasonable assumption when we had 1,000 relays and 50,000 users, and it turned out to be a really poor assumption when we're up to 2,000 relays and many hundreds of thousands of users. So we need to cut down that window size. Keeping it fixed doesn't seem so bad, but if we cut it down to 100 cells, so you can only fetch 50 kilobytes at a time before you have to ask for another batch of cells, then we're going to be providing better service for the people who aren't fetching very much and slowing down the people who are fetching a lot, and then hopefully there will be a better balance. Okay, so those were a couple of problems that we need to talk about in the first issue. The next one is, let's think more about this bulk transfer. How does that work, and what can we do about it? So the first thought is, economics can tell us a lot about this stuff. Once upon a time, we were thinking, there's going to be an equilibrium. If the Tor network is really fast, we're going to attract more users, and it'll slow down again. And if it becomes slow, then some of the users will give up and leave, and it will speed up again. So we imagined this point, this optimal latency of how many users we're going to have. The problem there is that different types of users have different tolerance for latency. So while the web browsing users, while the people in Iran who are trying to get to Twitter are clicking and wondering why it doesn't work, there are people elsewhere who are setting up their BitTorrent file and then going to sleep. So the people who are sleeping really don't care if the latency is 7 seconds or 9 seconds or 4 seconds, whereas the people who are trying to web browse really care about that. So how can we balance this? The way that Tor does its round robining right now, so at the Tor relay, there are a bunch of different circuits that all have cells that they want to send right now. Right now we do round robin. We just go one at a time and say, whichever circuit has something that it wants to send, you get to send one cell. And that means that if the relays are all rate limiting a lot, then the people who always have a cell that they want to send, the circuits that always have a cell they want to send, are going to end up sending a lot more cells over the course of that second. So if I'm rate limiting to 50 kilobytes a second, then the BitTorrent people are going to use up 47 of that 50, and then the web browsing people get a little bit in. And that's not good. That's not fair. We started out thinking that round-robining through all of them was the correct way to do fairness. So the next step is how do we become less fair or more fair? So here's a graph of all the circuits that 9 or so relays have seen over their lifetime. And we've ordered the circuits by the loudest 10% over here to the quietest 10% over here. And what we're looking at is the number of cells that they've seen over the lifetime of that circuit. So the really fast circuits, the really loud circuits, the ones that have seen the most cells, are seeing 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 cells. So that's several megabytes of data. And then if we look at just 10% over, the 20 percentile most loud circuits, they're only sending a few hundred cells. So there's really 10% or less of the circuits are really, really loud, and the rest of them are really not that loud. And if we look at it in terms of what's going on in the buffers right now, how many cells are queued on average for each circuit, the loudest 10% of the circuits, they've got a bunch of stuff queued. They've always got a kilobyte or 2 kilobytes or 5 kilobytes or 10 kilobytes of stuff queued waiting to be sent out. And the rest of them have nothing. So 90% of the Tor circuits are very quiet and very polite, and they're doing just fine. And a small percentage of them are sending most of the traffic, and they always have something more that they want to send. So what we need to do is when we're doing that round robining, we need to weight it by how loud the circuit has been lately. So if you keep on sending cells, then you don't get to send the next cell. You get downgraded, and the people who haven't sent much lately get to send the next cell. So that's a great intuition, but what do we actually do? How do we pick the algorithm? How do we decide if it's going to work? A fine question. I'll let you know in a few months once we figured it out. If you've got any ideas, please let me know. The basic idea that we're heading towards is some sort of weighted mean where we look at the number of cells you've sent recently, exponentially falling off by how long ago you did, and we choose more likely the ones who have a lower mean number of cells they've sent lately. Okay, another thing we can ponder, maybe we should be throttling the bandwidth in the client. If we've got all these file sharing people, all these bulk transfer people, maybe we should say your Tor client can send 20 kilobytes a second. That's all you get. And on the one hand, it's not really a very stable solution, because some guy is going to build a Tor++ client that doesn't rate limit itself, and they'll put that out there, and then we'll be competing with that. We can't really do it at the relay. So the next idea is, okay, you can't do it at the client. Let's make the relay rate limit you. But that doesn't work because there are 1,800 relays. And if I get 25 kilobytes a second times 1,800 relays, then I'm doing just fine. So maybe it's an okay idea. Maybe the Windows users don't know how to change their software, so they'd never fix it. Another reason why it might be a good idea, there are a lot of attacks these days that people are still researching. We don't know how well they work. But the idea is if you have a sustained flow that's really loud for a really long time, then it makes me easier to track you down and figure out where on the network you are. So maybe we'd actually be making you safer against some of these new anonymity attacks if we